And thank you so much for joining us for today's ComArtSci virtual talk. My name is Meredith Jagutis. I'm the Senior Director of Development in MSU's College of Communication Arts and Sciences, a college devoted to storytelling and the way we communicate and connect. So attendees, you will note that your microphone and camera will be off, but we absolutely encourage you to ask questions throughout the talk via the Q&A function, and we will moderate that as we go. Also, please make sure to tag us today with hashtag ComArtSci Talks. Now, for this special webinar in our series on media and communication careers pivoting in the pandemic, we are delighted to have the Dean of the college leading the conversation. So I will do our three intros. So Prabhu David joined ComArtSci as Dean in January of 2015. Prior to that, he spent 5 years as Professor and Associate Dean at the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication at Washington State University. And we will quickly gloss over the 17 years he spent as faculty at Ohio State University. He has won awards for research, teaching, and design. He graduated with a BS in physics from Loyola College in Chennai, earned his master's degree in journalism from Ohio University, and completed his doctoral degree in mass communication at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And under Prabhu's leadership, ComArtSci has launched a master's program in strategic communication and a new undergraduate major this year in communication leadership and strategy. And Dean David is joined today by two outstanding ComArtSci alumni. First, our local viewers will probably recognize April Clovis. April has her BA in marketing and master's in advertising from MSU. She is president and CEO of MSU Federal Credit Union, a position she has held for over 6 years. MSU FCU, for those of you who don't know, has, I think, at least over 4 billion.
Over 5 now.
At least 19 branches throughout Michigan.
20, but yeah, we're growing.
Over 800 employees.
9, but you're doing great, Meredith.
Thousands of members worldwide, myself included. April started with the organization as marketing specialist and then has ascended to her current role. She is extremely active in the community and on campus, serving on, it seems like, nearly every college or unit advisory board, including her recent service on the ComArtSci Alumni Advisory Board. And we are very grateful, April, for your insight, advice, and guidance.
Thank you.
And then with April, we have Scott Weiss. So Scott has his bachelor's in advertising from ComArtSci and was a 2019 recipient of the ComArtSci Outstanding Alumni Award. Scott is CEO and owner of Speakeasy, a globally renowned communication consulting firm with offices around the world. In 2019, Speakeasy worked with 5,000 executives in 15 countries from companies like E&Y, Accenture, Coca-Cola, Visa, Microsoft, and Nestle. And before joining Speakeasy, Scott was an executive vice president at Turner Broadcasting System. He is a frequent blogger and guest speaker and the author of Dare, Accepting the Challenge of Trusting Leadership. And outside of work, Scott is very involved in the Atlanta community and is the founder and chairman emeritus for the T. Howard Foundation, a nonprofit that promotes diversity and inclusion in the media and entertainment industry. So all three of these individuals are experts in communication, leadership, and strategy, and we're thrilled to have them with us today. And with that, Prabhu, I will turn it over to you to get started.
Terrific. Thank you, Meredith. And April and Scott, welcome. It's a delight to have both of you here on this discussion. I have to say both of them are incredibly talented individuals and experts in leadership, but they're also just genuinely fun individuals. I have talked with them on occasion and worked with them, and it's a delight to be on the panel with you. So welcome. So let's dive into our questions. One of the things that we've been talking about is, how do you lead during a pandemic? It's a simple, fundamental question. Scott, you've advised a number of CEOs and C-suite executives in Fortune 1000 companies. So give us your bird's eye view on how things are unfolding.
Well, it's been an interesting 5-6 months now that we're well into this, and it's been evolving for sure. And the way that most executives, leaders in corporations dealt with the pandemic in March and April is quite different than the way they're leading now, since we've learned quite a bit in the last few months. But I would say that the key undermining challenges for most leaders, companies, regardless of size, is dealing with such an extraordinary level of fear and uncertainty with their rank and file, and as well as with their clients. And driving business results when you've got an environment and an audience that is completely involved with trying to deal with things that matter in their lives, and creating such a high level of fear and dealing with so much ambiguity has created a very interesting challenge as far as how they create strategy and execute strategy while being empathetic and making sure that they are connected with their employees and their customers, but at the same time being able to drive business results, and for many of them take care of their shareholders and other constituents. So a very, very challenging agenda for all of them, with competing priorities every single day. And while I could laugh and say they're making it up as they go along, they're essentially making it up as they go along. I mean, there is no playbook for how to lead and manage in a pandemic, none that I'm aware of. And with all these executives' experience and training that they've had over their illustrious careers, never was there any dialogue that I'm aware of where they discussed how do you deal with employees, clients, in your business in a pandemic. So it is for sure new, and I would say with a great deal of confidence that many of them are doing an extraordinary job given the circumstances.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And so April, now you deal with it from a statewide or perhaps even local context. So how has it been for you?
Well, I think Scott described my life pretty nicely. You know, we're an essential business. So as a financial institution, I think people may not put that in perspective. So we needed to find a good balance of, you know, adhering to our governor's orders, as well as the, you know, number one priority of keeping our employees safe and healthy, but yet still serving members. And that also meant finding ways creatively to serve them in person when necessary. So for us, it's, you know, a lot of what Scott mentioned is, you know, forefront is always safety and health concerns for your team. But we still had to run a business, and how do we make those changes to do so safely? So we really have pivoted. You know, we have multiple channels for delivery of, you know, service, but emphasizing, communicating, sending a lot of messages to members on how they can have their, you know, needs met during this time, and sending similar messages on a regular basis to our employees on what we're doing to help them be successful, to help them stay safe, and yet still meet objectives of the business and live the mission of the organization. So I always have the, you know, whenever prior to pandemic life is what I like to say now, you know, we have guiding, you know, decision-making principles. And to me, we start mission first, and then make decisions in the best interest of members and employees. And so that hasn't changed. Maybe what we decided was different than what it had been in the past, but the way we came about those decisions really stayed focused. And I think that's helped us in, you know, during these times of uncertainty when you don't know all the answers, you can have a guiding force to, you know, that principle to help you make those choices.
Great. Thanks, April. So are any of the branches open now, or how? Yeah.
All of our branches are
Okay.
open. So we are statewide in the state of Michigan. We have 20 branches. We have Oakland County, you know, the Greater Lansing community, Grand Rapids, and Traverse City. So you might imagine during the last several months, every community had different local orders in addition to statewide orders. So Oakland County for some time had a much more restrictive, you know, quarantine experience for people. So if an employee had left the state of Michigan, they had to quarantine no matter what when they lived in Oakland County. Then you can picture Northern Michigan has always been one step ahead of the rest of the state. And so we were more fully operational with branch lobbies faster in that region. So, again, different decisions for different communities is also what we worked through.
Terrific. Thank you. I see we're going to go to a question on health communication next. And I see some faculty and others who are specialists in health communication. So we want you to weigh in and also share your questions with us. We'll try and get to as many of those questions as possible. So given that both of you are communication graduates and you really wear your allegiance to our college on your sleeve, we want to ask you about health risk communication during these times. There is a certain set of tenets, principles that we use for risk communication. But Scott, I think you touched on this already. This is a whole different kind of risky situation. So what is it, what kinds of principles can one adhere to during the pandemic when communicating about risk?
It's a great question. And I would tell you that it's being handled differently around the world. So there's an American way that companies are dealing with it. It's dealt differently in Asia, and it's dealt significantly different in EMEA. So it's not a one size fits all from a cultural standpoint. But I would tell you in the United States, because of the prevalence of the scientific and health community experts like the CDC and Johns Hopkins and what have you, that most companies, and we're advising companies to do this, is to mitigate risk by relying on expert opinion and expert guidance. And I would say that almost without deviation, most companies are following that path. So they're communicating essentially on behalf of the CDC or Johns Hopkins or whatever scientific health expert they want to rely on to mitigate the risk and essentially rely on their expertise to drive the guidelines and protocols for how companies should operate. And that level of expertise cascades down through, how airlines are dealing with it, all transportation, essentially, anything that's related to the public, impact on the public. They're really relying on the scientific and health community to do that. And it's really the only strategy that can alleviate the risk that you're referencing, because as soon as you start to create a personal or corporate opinion about those matters, you're creating essentially risk for your organization. So I don't want to say they're pushing it out, but essentially they're pushing it out instead of internally trying to set those guidelines. And I would say that as far as I'm aware of, I have not seen any negative response to that. I mean, most employees and customers would rather follow the guidelines of the CDC than a corporate protocol that somebody's creating without that expertise.
That's terrific. Yeah, what do you think is the difference? I'm going to come to April with a question as well on this, but Scott, I want to ask you about differences in other countries. Risk has become highly politicized. How do you think, it plays out in other countries? Do you see any sort of political, overtones to the way risk is processed or communicated?
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. So it is completely politically driven from what I've experienced over the last few months. So depending on the country and how that country is governed and the way that they execute governance, that's how they're dealing with the pandemic. And that's why there's such a broad range of approaches to how it's being done, including communication. So America, I would say, on the scale of transparency is probably pretty high, although transparency is an interesting word that I personally experienced in the last few months. It's like, wow. So, there's internal transparency and there's external transparency. There's not transparency for all, which is a new process we're all dealing with. How do we be transparent with our employees? And then we go into a conference room and we talk about a different level of transparency. And the same thing is applied to clients and customers. But I would say in America, the level of transparency is pretty high, although obviously there's a huge political divide right now in the way the Biden potential administration is dealing with the pandemic and how Donald Trump's administration is dealing with it. But companies are trying to stay out of that because it's very dangerous. And they're trying to communicate as transparently as they feel they are able to without it coming across like they're taking sides. And if there's anything that's been complex, it's been company executives who want to communicate a message, a strategy, a response, or something where it can be interpreted as a political message when the intent is not. But just because the way the citizens of this country are interpreting communication right now, they're interpreting it through a set of glasses that there's an agenda. There's a political agenda behind this message or their strategy. And no matter how much companies are trying to neutralize that, it's almost impossible to do. And if anything is unusual in the last few months, it's that. It's how to communicate messages of response or strategy without it coming across with a political agenda.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very challenging as well, right? And so April, in the branches, have you had any encounters of people coming in without masks or, you know?
Unfortunately, yes. You know, a lot of what Scott said is applicable in our business, right? So all the communication we have, either, you know, certainly to members as they visit our locations, has been to follow, you know, governor orders, CDC guidelines for health and safety, you know, anything related to what you need to do for protocols. I mean, we've retooled our facilities to be set up to be, you know, more safe by creating more distance between people, and to adhere to capacity restraints within each of our branch locations. And part of that is asking people if, you know, they're healthy enough to be out in public and are, you know, they need to wear a face covering. We've had some pushback, is very true. I think, you know, Scott touched on it. There is a portion of the community that, you know, interprets if you wear a mask as one political opinion or another, versus it's related to the health. And, you know, and so we just work through that individually. I tell everybody we serve all members and there will be people with different opinions, and our approach to this is to meet people where they are. So if you're not comfortable wearing a mask, we as a business would lose our business license in the state if we, you know, let you in without a mask. So how about we find alternatives to serve you? There's drive-ups, you know, you can be in your car, we can do curbside, and we have a, you know, vast suite of digital products that you can use at home. And so we just try to, you know, work through the, you know, reasons why we have the protocols in place and alternatives to help them still meet their needs. And so far that's been successful. You know, the honest truth is we've just had a small number of folks who, you know, question the decisions, you know, that have been put forward in the communication about adhering to the orders or the CDC guidelines.
So students and faculty and others who are on the Zoom call here, there is the general understanding about communicating during a crisis is that we rely upon scientific experts, and scientific expertise is generally perceived to be unbiased and for the most part has high fact or truth value. That has been seriously challenged now, and in the present and moving forward, how do we deal with that? So if there are researchers or students who've been thinking about this on the call, please share your thoughts with us. But I'll share one insight or finding from a survey that we did with MSU students. And we asked about the key source about health communication for them. And you'd be surprised, the CDC and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Stanley, who's our president, also an infectious diseases specialist. So the three of them, the three sources, rose to the top. So despite the challenge to credibility of scientists, at least in our study, the students chose medical scientific experts as the best source of information.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Prabhu, because the data that's coming out of the scientific community is fairly consistent. And I say fairly, it's not exactly the same, but there are a lot of common themes in the data that are coming out that would lead organizations to make decisions accordingly. What's happened is that the media is taking that data and creating headlines that have their own agenda, and we're all subject to it. I mean, you can't go anywhere without being subject to the media or social media, and the way that some fairly skilled communicators are taking the data and maneuvering, I won't use the word manipulating, but maneuvering the data in such a way that they can drive their agendas, which is what our employees or our customers are hearing. So even though the scientific community is somewhat consistent on the data, what are people actually hearing? So if you're a customer or an employee and you see that going on, you know, if you watch Fox News or you watch CNN, oh my God, how can they take the exact same data and spin it to a completely different conclusion? So there's a great deal of skepticism, which really adds validity to those sources, where it's like, you know what, I can't listen to all this noise. I just got to listen to the experts and draw my own opinion. So I've seen a lot of companies take that data from those sources and others and aggregate them into a scientific conclusion that comes across as has no agenda. And that's what they're trying to drive through and cascade down through their organizations to the best of their ability, which in many cases is completely counter to what you hear or see on Twitter or CNN or what have you. So, you know, then employees, it creates more stress with employees because, again, they're constantly bombarded with all this social media, and yet their companies are communicating messages that are different. So that has become part of companies' mission too, is how they handhold employees and customers through the processing of all this information, because it's so varied across different platforms. Again, very interesting, unprecedented time in that regard from a communication standpoint, because, you know, how companies, organizations are maneuvering the data has been really interesting.
Absolutely. So April, there is a question in the chat. Perhaps you can take this one first.
Okay.
What specific technologies and forms of communication do you think
that we're using for members or employees or both? Is it
both
specified?
internally and with customers? So let's take internally first. We've talked quite a bit about,
So internally for us, so a couple of things, maybe just to really quick set the rest of the comment. We were very much in-person culture. We have 900 employees. They're, you know, our non-branch folks are in 2 buildings. So we have a very on-site workforce where we would have regular in-person meetings to communicate. We also had a variety of platforms already established to do digital communications with employees. So we have an employee intranet. We sent employees home about 5 days prior to the stay-at-home orders from the state of Michigan, shortly after MSU, maybe within 2 days after MSU decided to send students home. And our IT team, really, we had some projects that were nearing completion that they just quickly stood up in 2 days. So that allowed us to send almost all employees home that were, you know, could do their work remotely. And we use a WebEx instead of Zoom. And so we have done a few things. So we use WebEx for all of our internal meetings, coaching. We've onboarded new people with the training platforms that are within the WebEx modules. And instead of having an in-person all-employee meeting weekly, we pivoted really quickly to video. And so what happens is we have an on-staff videographer. He comes and films me in my office every week, and I send out a broadcast message to employees with whatever new information we have, topics, you know, for how we're serving members, and, you know, where we stand financially to, you know, and then for us, I always started with letting the employees know how important their work was, because we're still serving the members in our mission. And so we did a lot of, here's the number of members who sent me emails or text messages to say thank you for the service that you gave them in the last 2 weeks when, you know, we were on first shutdown and people were losing their jobs and didn't know what to do and how are they going to pay their bills. And so, for us, we just started using a lot more of the online communication channels. So Teams, collaboration groups that happens with WebEx, our employee intranet, and a lot of video.
Great, thank you.
And if you want me to do for members, we did a lot of social media, website communication, a lot of email, especially as we were, closing lobbies and, modifying hours and redirecting traffic, utilized all those ways to connect with members very quickly. So that's been very positively received.
Great. And Scott, what about employee concern across not just the country, around the world? I mean, people are being laid off, and how are leaders communicating with their employees and staff?
Yeah, so the competing agendas in most corporate meetings are taking care of the business and taking care of their people, and they're not necessarily the same strategy. So if you've got, whether it's a small employee base or a large employee base, universally, what they're concerned about is, am I going to be okay? And that question is not just health, it's financially, my job, what's going to change? Am I coming back to my office? Is anything going to change with leadership? I mean, there's so much uncertainty, and a lot of it is driven by fear. So the challenge, or the mission of leadership right now at companies is, I need to be really optimistic and encouraging. We're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. We're going to be okay. And create some level of confidence with employees that we're equipped and enabled to be able to work through this pandemic in a way where we're going to come out the other side. Things are going to be different, but we're going to be okay. And if leaders can do that and communicate that in a very authentic, very real way, people are responding positively and favorably. And that really is, from a communication standpoint, that's the challenge. What method or platform do you use to communicate empathy in a way that it's believable? Now, the business communication, completely different. I mean, we could talk about finances, financials, and business opportunities, and customer fall off, and changes in the market, and how are we going to pivot, and all of that's the business stuff. There's lots of ways to do that, and the consequences are not as dramatic as they are with the employee personal communication, where empathy and humility are really the two key characteristics that create that level of believability. Because if I'm an employee and I don't believe you, it just makes me more concerned, not less concerned. And to April's point, using video, it's a lot more risk, and it takes a lot more competency to do it well. But if you can do it well, where you come across as, this is me, I'm the executive in charge, but this is me, this is how I believe that we're going to get through this together, and what we're doing to make sure that you're comfortable and you feel safe, and you can do that in a believable way, you'll succeed. And of course, a lot of leaders have never been trained to do that. I mean, what class do you take in Michigan State to learn how to communicate with empathy and humility? I mean, it's just, and no executive is really equipped to do it unless they do it naturally. So, that's the new part of the skill set of leadership in a pandemic. And those that are doing it well are winning.
Absolutely, well said. So the idea about, I've been thinking about this topic a little bit as well. And, on campus, the notion of authenticity and communicating with empathy, and to be straight up about it. We don't know, and there's a lot we don't know, and we're not the only ones who don't have the answers. We are in the same boat as everybody else. But to give employees, the best information we have, and to state it convincingly, and to be authentic, and to express our fears, and like you said, humility. Those are all wonderful attributes.
Yeah. And I will tell you that I've experienced a lot of very senior level executives in all different sizes of companies who have taken that personal risk and have communicated messages of, I don't know. I'm doing everything I can to learn and find out how to lead us through this, but I can't tell you that I have all the answers right now. And if they can deliver that message with authenticity and sincerity and empathy, people are okay with it. It's like, okay, we didn't expect you to have all the answers. We just want to make sure you're telling us the truth all the time. And that's really the key. And those executives that have accepted that, which is a very unnatural position. You know, if you ask most senior executives, how many times do you communicate messages to your employees that you don't know something? It's very rare. So, you know, those that are able to say, okay, I'm okay with doing that, they're getting a fantastic response. Because it's human.
And so April, yeah, so Scott, I just want to ask April the same question. The advice that you've given in terms of being authentic and being the human side of being a leader. So April, how have you been able to pass on that aspect of your values to your employees?
Sure. As I listen to Scott talk about it, I might be rare, but I've always told the employees if I don't know something or it's a new experience. And that might come from the organization that I'm a part of, and meaning that we're growing. And I've been an internal employee for 24 years. So I can stand in front of people and say, I have not led a $5.5 billion institution before. When I started, we were $2.5 billion. So things are different when we're double and, in this role. And so everything is constantly changing. And, I tell people the challenges that we have. I've always believed that it's really important to do that. And I talk a lot about, it comes from my communications background. And it's marketing communications don't always end up in the CEO office. And so I do have, some of that background that came from schooling that, tells you need to, there's nothing wrong with telling the truth at the end of the day, and I would stand behind it all day long if it just means people weren't comfortable because I told them I didn't know. I'd rather do that than 2 weeks from now tell them, well, I kind of made that up and here's what's real. I think that doesn't go better for you to stay employed or be the leader and have people have confidence. So I think our team really knows how much I care about them, care about their success during this time. I literally wrote handwritten notes, mailed gift to everyone, told them thank you. We've done town halls quarterly to review the financials and the decisions that we're making, why we made those decisions, to show the financial impact of those choices and what we needed to be doing. And so I think the ongoing for me is kind of just doing what we've always done, which is be really open and transparent to our team and, say, as we get new information, we'll tell you. And what we set out to do in the beginning was set a regular cadence of when they would hear from us. So they would know every week we would tell them what we knew differently. And if something was really significant in between, we'd do an additional communication. And I think, all you can control is how and when and what you do. I can't control what was happening on the outside, but I could control that I was going to tell people I knew nothing new or I knew something new and make them feel a little more comfortable about, we would keep them updated. And I think that's been very helpful as the conditions evolve, every day.
Terrific. Yeah, that is the human side, that, being a caring and compassionate leader, that's what people are looking for these days. And I think that is so important. You cannot underestimate its power. Well, one insight I learned during these times is this, the call for transparency. Transparency, in my mind, is a proxy for trust during these times. So when someone says, we want more transparency, it's not like they want loads and loads of data, more spreadsheets that I can, dump on them. But what they're really looking for, I think in many ways, is trust. And trust is earned. It's not something a leader gets overnight. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that in terms of truly, often it's trust that people are asking for when they ask for transparency. But there is also a question in the chat by one of our faculty who's an expert in science communication. So we have to be careful how we respond to this. We better get this right. So he says, how do institutions build trust in the early stages of a pandemic? And has that process changed over the last few months? And who are
Well,
the, yeah,
it's a big topic.
topic, right?
Obviously, it's a big topic, and just the definition of trust in and of itself is an interesting conversation. But my experience has been that most employees, their default position is "I don't trust you." Now that comes from decades and decades of important people leadership in different institutions and organizations not being honest, truthful with their constituents. Where a lot, whether it's academic or political or corporate, a lot of leaders have not been good, and it's created an enormous level of distrust across the board in this country. And most individuals start every relationship with a default position that "I don't trust you" before you even open up your mouth. So every comment that you make, every strategy that you communicate is looked at as with some level of skepticism. So when you say you have to earn trust, that is not an easy thing to accomplish when your environment, your audience, your constituents immediately do not trust you. And if you do anything that reinforces that default position, you're done. And I hate to say it, it's very difficult to overcome that. When an individual sees a leader as somebody who is not trusting, it's very difficult to overcome that. So in this kind of an environment, it's incredibly important for transparency is, I agree with you. It really is about trust, but it really is also about what is the level of truth that you're going to communicate to me. And I rarely see leaders who just communicate everything, the absolute truth all the time. There's always some competing agenda or influence that causes them to hold back or slightly maneuver the truth in such a way. And they do that with the assumption that people don't know it, and they're dead wrong. They absolutely know it. And the power of the internet, by the way, there's almost nothing I can't find on the internet. If I want to find the truth, it may take me a while, but I can probably find it on the internet. So if you're going to communicate a competing message and I'm going to find it, a conflicting set of information on the internet, you're done. You've lost my trust, and it will be very difficult for you to ever earn it back. So the bottom line is that if you're in a position of influence, trust doesn't come easy. And the way that you earn it is through the truth. And you can't maneuver the truth. You're either all in or you're not going to achieve the trust that you're looking for. There's no halfway way to overcome it. You have to be completely all in with the truth to earn anyone's trust these days.
Absolutely. So no half truths. April, who do you think has been the best spokesperson during this pandemic? On the national or international scene, who have you said, this person's got it, I want to emulate this person?
I think there's lots of folks. I mean, everyone has their approach to what, I certainly look, to leaders. So everyone looks to Dr. Fauci. I think he's, coming from a non-political point of view. He's telling you the medical science. I think our governor in the state of Michigan has done a nice job in regularly communicating and making this about her decisions are data-driven and medically driven to keep residents of Michigan safe. And I think and then bringing people, with her to reinforce where the information came from, so I think those are great ways to do that. I think as we talk about trust, I think, it's really difficult to just start establishing trust the day we went into pandemic mode. I think your trust had to be earned before then so people can trust you during a crisis. And I think trust is something you need to be constantly working towards with your employees, with your, in our case, our members and our constituents. And that comes from always doing what is right and the best of your ability and communicating what you're doing and showing people that I said this and we did this, and there isn't a disconnect between them. And I think that's been part of what we talk about in our organization that has gone well is we've had the rapport, we've had the trust, we've had the connectivity with our employees and members prior to pandemic. So we had earned trust that people could believe us when we talked about what we were choosing to do, because we had earned it prior to the day we needed to have a crisis. And so I think that's something people, need to think about is, trust doesn't only come into play the moment you need it. Trust should always be there. So when you do need people to trust you, they have built that confidence in you.
Right. Also, the Prime Minister of New Zealand is held up as
She's great.
Yeah, she's great. Yeah. And,
I had a chance to hear her speak about 2 years ago, and and that's what it is. So 2 years ago, the message she was saying for the her country of New Zealand is New Zealanders first, and everything that she had and her platform was for her country. That was 2 years ago prior to pandemic, and so she built that, and she's lived through meeting those commitments for the last 2 years. So then in her country, people believe her to be credible in what she was doing. And I think, that's proven very well for their country. There's lots of, people that follow her on Instagram that, say they want to move to New Zealand when the borders open.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Angela Merkel too has had a lot of credibility, in terms of how to communicate during a crisis. There is a question in the chat on nonprofits and how during a pandemic do you hold events and keep people interested? And it's so much Zoom fatigue. What ideas do you have?
And I will answer this maybe. So we support a lot of nonprofits, and we do a lot of fundraising with our employees. So we've been creative as well. Some of the organizations that I belong to and things that they have done that I thought were really interesting and creative. The Sparrow Foundation is supporting one of our local hospitals, and they have where you can order from a local restaurant, to have a brunch, right? So they would normally have an in-person brunch and an activity, and instead you go and you pick up your kit from this restaurant that you might like, and the chef is going to, have a Zoom of how to make the fancy brunch you might have gone out to eat, and, have that one-on-one. So I think they're trying to connect you with an experience that we all might have thought would be interesting in our lives of like, I'd love to learn how to cook from X person that's a pretty well-known chef. And so I think those are some ways of doing it. We've seen a lot of virtual 5Ks, see organizations change what they need from people to, not be as much in-person focused. I serve as the chair of the Lansing Symphony, and they have done, we've always had an event with raffle tickets, and so they've changed how that's going to look online. In some of the organizations now that you can have 100 people outside and it's still nice, they're doing some, distanced events outdoors. So I think people are really getting creative, and, for all the nonprofits that I'm a part of, they've really also increased their messaging. Michigan Humanities, highlighted people online. They moved their, programs. So they have a poetry out loud program for high school students, and, all those folks went online. And so I think it is hard to watch a lot online all the time. But I definitely think people are engaging in new ways, and you're getting new people to be a part of your organization. So that's been kind of fun to see.
Great. April, we'll stay with you for one more question here. A very specific question about, are your members getting frustrated with the inevitable delays during the pandemic?
Yes, our members are frustrated. I've seen a few quickly on the Q&A pop up on people talking about they're our members. So thank you for being a member, and I appreciate your kind words about the credit union. It's hard. People are, I think, in general frustrated, right? So everything is stressful in your life right now. The uncertainty isn't just about us at work. It's my children. I have children who are, people have kids who are not handling social isolation well. They're not getting what they need in the schools. People are trying to balance working at home and, taking care of their children or their parents. So many things are causing people to just be frustrated right now, including I'm just unhappy I don't get to live life the way I want to. So then you layer on, you're trying to do something and now there's a delay. And that's been challenging. It's been challenging for our organization. When we closed lobbies because that was the safe thing to do, that made you were in a drive up lane, could be 35, 40 minutes when you're used to that being 2 minutes, right? Not thinking that everything that was happening in person now went to this new channel. We've experienced a 30% increase in calls, even though we've opened lobbies back up. And we've experienced 100% increase in online chat. So, and I have the same number of employees doing this, increased volume of work. And so there are long hold times. Most people are pretty understanding. Those who are really frustrated, we call, we apologize. There's that transparency. I tell them what's happening and tell them, we have the same number of staff doing twice the amount of work and we're doing the best we can to get everyone taken care of. And everyone's needs take longer now, right? So if you're going to explain to me you lost your job and you need a workout, that's a longer phone call than you might have had, 2 months ago to check to see if my direct deposit came in, right? And so needs are changing and that's hard. And so we try to, again, meet everyone where they are and help them understand to the best of our ability. But it is challenging. We're not the only retail experience that people have to wait longer for now.
So speaking about challenges, in a country like ours where the science is so advanced and actually, we may have our economic difficulties, but still we're the wealthiest country on the planet. And we have been struggling so much. Scott, in your experiences with multinationals, how is life in other parts of the world and how are they negotiating with these challenges?
It's complicated and it's really driven a lot by culture. So there are cultures who follow orders differently than they do in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most obvious, as far as contradiction or differences that I've experienced through our clients is that in this country, that people don't follow directions very easily for some reason. I can't explain it, but if you really think about what's happened in the pandemic, there's been 3 things that has been recommended by all these scientists and health experts: wear a mask, wash your hands, and social distance. It's not that complicated. And for whatever reason, this country is having a very difficult time executing what seems to be common sense. And there is evidence in this country that it works, because if you look at the city of New York and what Governor Cuomo has executed through his leadership in that city, their positivity rate is below 1%. And they have gone through an extraordinary curve and is now considered the safest large city in the world with respect to the pandemic. And it's in the United States, but it's an outlier. It's the only city like that in our country. And if you look at other countries and other cities in other countries, the idea of wearing a mask, social distancing, and washing your hands, everybody follows those directions like it's common sense. Like, I get it. You have to do that. We have a pandemic. But in this country, no matter where I travel or what I've seen, I see more people without masks than I do with them, which just blows my mind. I don't get it. But that's what I'm seeing as far as cultural differences in the countries that we do business in.
So a little bit of thinking ahead now. What do you think is going to be the new normal, say 6 months from now or a year from now when we have a vaccine? What are the biggest changes you think the pandemic is going to leave behind in the way we work and play, or even in our personal lives? What are your observations?
Well, so that's all I can do is draw from experience. So I was CEO of this company during 9/11, and in a lot of ways, I'm experiencing a lot of similarities as far as the impact on people's lives. And at that time, because I remember it vividly, everybody thought the world was going to change. Travel was going to change. The way that we interact with each other was going to change. The way businesses conduct business was going to change. No one will ever get on an airplane again. I mean, all these dramatic changes as a result of 9/11. And it took about 3 years, my recollection, before everything was almost exactly the way it was. That doesn't mean attitudes haven't changed, and it doesn't mean that there were some real changes in the way people did things. But by and large, this is a very resilient country, and there are things that the citizens of this country love to do. And I suspect that things will return to not exactly the way it was earlier this year and before, but I think that you will see a large part of our life as we've known it return the way it was. And I've heard similarly from the executives that I work with, from our clients, and the way the market's responding is yes, there will be some more people working from home, and there may be somewhat less the way people do business travel, but by and large, roll the clock forward a year and things will be pretty much the way it was. We're still going to go out to dinner. We're still going to get on airplanes. We're still going to take vacations. We're still going to come into an office. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it because that's.
Yeah, I like this. 2 years from now, we should go back and rewind this tape and run it. Yeah. So thanks, Scott. So we have one more question, but April, what are your thoughts on the new normal?
I think for us, what we've done is a few things. So I've embraced more work from home than we would have before. So I think we'll find a hybrid of that. But I agree with Scott. I think on-site, in-person is still more critical for how people work. I think it is better for the organization and for culture and for productivity across the board, but we'll be more flexible that way. I think we'll, be smarter about which meetings we think we need to do get on an airplane and go and do in person. But I don't think we'll stop flying and doing business travel. I just think maybe it will be reduced by some capacity. I think for us, we'll have new delivery channels, so now you can video chat us instead of coming in, and I think what will happen is people just do all of it and more. So they'll video chat us, but they'll still come visit a branch when they need to. And so I think I agree with Scott. I think, it will be not an immediate, everything resumes, but I think there will be a gradual resuming back to what we have considered typical way of life. And, my mom is, said to me, I can't wait, this took a year out of my life and I'm retired and wanted to travel and I can't wait to get back at it. And I think there are a lot of people who just think they put their life on pause and they want to get back at it. Now, on a consumer side, what I can tell you is we've seen people make some changes. And so I don't know how permanent those will be, but a lot more pools being put into homes. People bought boats and RVs for their vacations instead of, some of the things that maybe have done in the past. So that may take a little longer to rebound. But again, I think you can only take so many RV trips before you decide I would rather fly, at least me.
Probably, I'll make one comment just to add on to something April said, which I do think is important and would be good to bring up for others, is that a large number of our clients who have created a complete different work from home environment than they ever have before. And one of the things that is not being talked about a lot is the loss of innovation, creativity, and collaboration. And a lot of the reasons why they're not talking about it is because they can't accommodate people coming back from the office. They have workstations that are right next to each other. They can't reconfigure their offices overnight, and they don't want to send a message to the street or to their customers that they're not going to be able to fulfill their mission. So they're not talking a lot about it, but behind the curtain, it's a really major issue. So the whole idea of creativity, collaboration, innovation doesn't happen in formal Zoom meetings. It happens in hallways, it happens over coffee, it happens when you have a drink or dinner with your colleagues and so on. And none of that is happening right now. And a lot of companies are suffering significantly from it. They're just not talking about it. And that's what I think is going to be one of the key drivers of our work lives resuming the way it was, is that is incredibly important for a lot of companies to advance forward, and they're missing out on it and they want it back.
Oh, you're quite right, Scott. I've been thinking about this too. And we sense that on campus as well, because faculty do that kind of creative, innovative work all the time. Even though they can connect with one another via Zoom, it's not the same thing. Have you noticed a productivity panic though? especially again on a campus where faculty are so used to writing and doing a lot of work. Now with caregiving and taking care of kids, many of them have had to slow down on what they normally do. That's led to some very interesting effects. They're so concerned that they're not able to perform at the same peak level. Also, they're concerned about safety and the well-being of their families. Have you noticed that trend?
Absolutely. But that gets back to the transparency topic that April and I have been talking about, is that, companies are not going to issue statements that say, because of our our inability to collaborate, our productivity is down 20% because of the pandemic. They're just not going to do that. And neither are universities, by the way. So
Right.
it's not talked about, but it's absolutely a reality. And I've had many senior executives say, we need to schedule a Zoom meeting to collaborate and innovate. How do we do that? I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how you schedule a Zoom meeting to innovate. Probably
Right.
let's schedule a meeting and let's innovate for an hour. I mean, it happens spontaneously.
Right.
It doesn't happen by appointment. So
Absolutely.
it's going to come back. It has to. And it absolutely is impacting productivity, without a doubt.
Mhm.
Just not
And that
talked
is,
about.
yeah, that is the serendipity aspect to creativity, right? It just happens. You can't just summon it on demand. It just, sometimes
I mean,
these sparks just happen. Yeah.
How many meetings have you gone to, formal meetings with department heads or what have you, and everybody comes with their PowerPoint deck and their prepared agenda, and you go through your hour-long meeting, and then you go out for lunch. And the dialogue that happens at lunch is the dialogue that matters.
Absolutely. So we always end these call. Thanks, Scott, and April. Thank you so much. We always end these our Zoom sessions with thoughts for our students, and both of you are fantastic Spartans. So, what suggestions, advice you have for our students who are getting ready to graduate and get back to school actually next week?
Well, I'll be fast. All I will tell you from my personal experience and experience with others is that internships are really, really important to determine what you want to be when you grow up. So absolutely leverage that to the best of your ability. And secondly, mentors. Reach out and find mentors that can guide you through the process. And if you find the right mentors to do that, you will accelerate your decisions on what you want to do and how you want to do it, is leveraging the expertise and experience of others.
The first thing that I would say, just due to we have interns, and I have a lot of our team with college age students, is don't use this semester as a pause on your studies or a pause on your career plans, because I think a lot of students also don't know how to handle the uncertainty of semester doesn't look like normal. So I'm just going to take it easy. And really 2 years from now, when you go to graduate, somebody's going to ask about this semester and what was your experience and what classes did you take? And it may be harder, but find a way to leverage what you're doing that is different and more challenging and create it to be a strength that you can talk about to a future employer. I learned how to pivot. I'm flexible. I've learned how to be, more resourceful in finding internships because companies, were not on site. And here's the projects that I did for companies instead. And so I really think, again, finding creative ways to highlight what you've achieved during a very uncertain time.
Great, thank you. And our Spartan community and our students, I have to say I'm very proud of their resilience, their creativity, their resourcefulness, the way they have handled the pandemic. And the last 6 months have been not easy, but we have risen to the occasion. And I think the next 6 months or the next 12 months will continue to do so. It's really been a delight. Thank you both for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it back to Meredith.
Yeah, I agree. It's been really interesting. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, April and Scott, for being a fantastic Spartan panel. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. We appreciate you joining us today and look forward to providing you with future ComArtSci talks. So our next one is in the works for mid-September. So watch your inbox for a follow-up email with a survey and the next invitation. And everyone have a great day and go green.
Go white.
Go white.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you.